The Transfiguration is always preached on the second Sunday of Lent. So let's just kind of talk about what the Transfiguration is, talk about why this is important, talk about some of the messages in this, but then get it to a message of what does this mean for you today. Now, in full disclosure, I'm just going to be honest with you. This is one of the more dense theological homilies that I have ever preached, but I promise you we will get through it. Don't worry. It's not a big deal. Okay. As I said, the Transfiguration is always the gospel of the second Sunday of Lent. So we always begin with the threefold temptation of Christ. Then we get to the Transfiguration. The Transfiguration is told in three of the four Gospels, the three what we call synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so this year, we're in the year of Matthew's Gospel. We hear Matthew's version of the Transfiguration. But this is every year. And so it's important to kind of ponder, why is this? Well, the church in her liturgy, and also Pope St. Leo the Great in an ancient homily, give us the answer. Both Pope Leo the Great and the church's liturgy and the preface prayer that we'll pray in a few minutes say that the reason we have the Transfiguration is because Jesus wants to point to the apostles what is coming. Where are we going? Okay, maybe you've heard that kind of self-help mantra, begin with the end in mind. There's some truth in that. And that's what Jesus is doing, because he's about to go to his passion. And so Pope Leo the Great and the preface of the Mass say that the passion leads to the glory of the resurrection. And so Jesus gives Peter, James, and John this vision, this image of him after the resurrection. What his glorified body will look like in heaven. Why? To strengthen them for the coming trials, the coming persecutions. So Jesus gives them sort of this hope to look forward to. There's a couple other characters that are here on the mountain. Moses and Elijah. What do they have to do with the story? Moses always represents the law. Right? So in the ancient world, in the ancient Israelite world, Moses represents the law, the 5 books of the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Elijah, on the other hand, represents the prophets. And so what we see here is between the two of them, virtually the entirety of the Old Testament that leads to Jesus, who's the fulfillment. Okay. We're just kind of laying the groundwork here. There's a few other things to consider. Moses, remember in Numbers chapter 20, Moses was forbidden from entering into the promised land. Remember the story? Remember that what happened? The people were out in the desert. They were thirsty. Moses implores the Lord on their behalf. God says, okay, take your staff, strike the rock, and water's going to flow out. And Moses didn't believe. And he kind of argued with God. And we're told in Numbers chapter 20 that because of that, Moses could only gaze upon the promised land. He could not enter into it. And so the first time that Moses has been in the promised land is today, the Transfiguration, when he is on Mount Tabor with Jesus and Elijah and Peter, James, and John. This is important. Because who is Jesus? Jesus is portrayed as the new Moses, particularly in Matthew's gospel. So just think about a couple of things. Moses brought the people out of Egypt. Jesus, at the beginning of Matthew's gospel, is taken into Egypt, and Joseph and Mary bring him back after Herod dies. Moses received the law on Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments. Jesus receives gives the new law of the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount. So there's this mountain. There's just this parallel between Jesus and Moses. Moses fed the people in the desert with manna. Jesus breaks the loaves for the 5,000 and feeds the people. Jesus is the new Moses. Remember last week in the gospel? I realize I'm going kind of fast through this. Hopefully you're following. That's why I'm recording it. You can go back and listen again I put it on YouTube. Remember last week in the gospel. What happened? Jesus was tempted. Who else was tempted? Adam. Adam was tempted and failed. Jesus, the new Adam, was tempted and triumphed. Did not give in. So Jesus is portrayed as the new Adam, but this week he's portrayed as the new Moses. What did Moses do? He led his people into the promised land. He, of course, didn't get to go in, but Jesus promises us the new promised land. He gives us this promise of heavenly glory if we persevere, if we are united with him. And so what does this mean? And put it all together. What does this mean for you? How does this impact your life? Okay. Imagine just for a moment that you have been invited up the mountain. You've been invited up the mountain of Transfiguration with Peter, James, and John. Jesus gives you this invitation. First of all, what is your response? Is your response, well, okay, I've got a basketball tournament, I'll go next week? Would your response be, well, let me just finish up this project at work and then I'll be there? Would your response be, I have to respond to these 14 emails and then I'll go? Would your response be, well, I've got a family reunion, I'll check back with you next month. I'll be there when I can. Would that be your response? Or would your response be, yes, I want to go. I want to see this. The reason I put this question to us is because Jesus gives us this opportunity literally every time we go to Mass. So here's where I said that this gets theologically dense. Bear with me. I promise you we'll get through it. Dr. Scott Hahn wrote an article called The Eucharist as Parousia. Okay, what is parousia besides a word that Father uses to make him seem smarter than he actually is? Parousia is a word that literally just means the second coming. So when I say parousia, what it really means is Jesus coming again at the end of time. So Dr. Hahn's article could just as easily be retitled, The Eucharist as Second Coming. Okay, have we thought about it in that sense? Have you ever thought about the Eucharist, what happens here on this altar, as the second coming of Christ? Because the truth is that, yes, we believe Jesus will come again at the end of time. That is a dogma of our faith. We believe that. It is also equally true to acknowledge that when he does come, he will not have one more ounce of glory than what is contained in this host. Or maybe a better way to phrase it would be this. The same Eucharist that you will receive in about 10 minutes does not have one more drop of glory than Jesus Christ when he comes again at the end of time, because it's the same Jesus. It's the same Jesus that is exposed in the monstrance every time you go to Eucharistic adoration. It's the same Jesus that we receive when we come to Mass. It's the same Jesus here on this altar. The same glorified Jesus that revealed himself to Peter, James, John, Moses, and Elijah on Mount Tabor at the Transfiguration. Now, can we see that? No, of course not. It's veiled. It's veiled by the host. But it's the same Jesus. And if we have eyes of faith, we can in fact see this. And so what impact does that have on you? Because remember that question. If Jesus invited you up the mountain, how would you respond? The truth is, he is inviting you up the mountain. You are invited to come to the Transfiguration, to go up the mountain today with him here at Mass. And what is our response? What's our response? This is a good examination of conscience. Is our response, I'll go when I can. I'll make it when it's convenient. Is our response, I want to get out of here as fast as I can. Father, quit preaching, shut up. Maybe that is. I don't know. It might be. That's okay if it is. But it's the same Jesus. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. I'm going to end with this. St. Faustina Kowalska is one of my true heroes. Okay, I admire so deeply St. Faustina. If you're not familiar with her writings, I encourage you to read them. Her diary is probably the best spiritual reading I have ever read, the Diary of St. Faustina. It's called Divine Mercy in My Soul. St. Faustina lived from the year 1905 to 1938 in Poland. So she lived right after World War I and just before World War II. And she received these visions from Jesus. She conversed with him as clearly as I am conversing with you right now. And he would appear to her and speak to her. And after this series of revelations, this series of visions, St. Faustina said something that I just find this so profound. She said, if angels were capable of envy, if it was possible for an angel to commit the sin of envy, she said they would envy us, you and me, human beings, they would envy us for two reasons. Two reasons. She said one would be suffering. Isn't that interesting? Suffering. Because in our suffering, we can unite ourselves to the cross of Christ in a way that an angel cannot. So she said angels would envy us for suffering. But the second reason would be Holy Communion. Because we are invited to the banquet, we are invited to the Mount of Transfiguration to receive our Lord's body, blood, soul, and divinity into our own, to likewise be transformed as a foretaste to our glorification that is coming one day in heaven. May this invitation not pass us by. Today, Jesus invites you up the mountain. Will you come?